Let this truck pass. This road is so noisy. It's so annoying sometimes. Hello again, everyone. I'm Neil, aka Ishmelon, and this is, again, another episode of my Let's Talk Over Pi MTG Color Pie Philosophy videos. This one focusing on blue. In the previous video, which I'll put a link to here and probably have a little image for up there maybe. In that previous video, I focused on white, which was just a full analysis, extrapolation into the philosophy of just the single color of white in the color pie. And today we're doing blue, and the next ones following, of course, are going to be black, red, and green in that order before we even start to dive into multicolors. As a reminder for these videos, what I'm trying to do is have each of them focused from that color's perspective. For example, there's going to be a part later where I talk about blue and white together, and since I already did that kind of in white, I tried to do that from white's perspective. So this time I'm going to try and do it from blue's perspective. As we go further into these videos, it's going to be harder and harder to avoid doing repeat stuff. But like I said, I'm going to try and do all of these from the color of topics perspective. That being said, follow-up reminder, the whole color wheel thing, it's a game design tool made for a card game built for 13-plus-year-olds. Don't take this too seriously. This whole thing's basically a horoscope or like a Quizly personality test. It's really just meant for fun, for entertainment, and like I said in the very first video of the series, just a little brain teasing, a little mental exercise. There we go. With all of that out of the way, let's continue on with blue. Now, to reiterate blue's key phrase, blue focuses on perfection through knowledge. Am I going to do the little image thing again? The little words on the side? Blue's definition of perfection is essentially just reaching the top of its potential in whatever arena it is that it decides upon, which can obviously vary from person to person, from blue-aligned individual to blue-aligned individual. Their perfection means that there is essentially no more room to improve in that direction. So it's either on to the next venture or sharing that knowledge, that experience, that expertise with those also pursuing behind them. Oftentimes blue could be constantly chasing that perfection, becoming ever closer but never quite reaching it, which, I mean, in reality is probably what happens most of the time. Or they'll just get to a point where they figure, okay, I'm never going to really reach it, and then just settle and start to intentionally plateau and spread that knowledge out. Their pursuit will often hold more substance than the destination itself, you know, all the experiences in the journey and not the location. But whether blue acknowledges that or not, a lot of their learning comes from the pursuit as opposed to finding the thing that they were looking for or reaching the point that they were trying to reach. And to elaborate on that, do I think blue will ever actually reach that perfection, or does blue think it will ever reach that perfection? I think in general, blue definitely believes that it can, at the very least. It's the color most confident in its own potential and in working to reach that potential, which can sometimes lead blue-aligned individuals to being fairly egotistical or elitist, I guess might be the word. With that in mind, it's often generally not the most practical or pragmatic, which is ironic because its two allies are white and black, like the two colors that are the heaviest agenda colors. Anyway, blue is very imaginative and creative and curious, and it loves to focus on and utilize the abstract or the hypothetical or concepts and ideas. I'm probably going to be saying abstract a lot in this one. Some examples of blue's perfection may be a scholar or a student of some kind trying to achieve the best grade in their class, or just trying to garner the best result from their learning. Could be an athlete trying to break their personal record or trying to create a new personal best for whatever event or exercise they're performing. Could even just be a video game speedrunner finding the perfect route in whatever game they're trying to perfect. The point is that blue wants to achieve the highest accomplishment that it can in the most efficient manner, generally. Most commonly in our world, blue will take the form of scientists or professors, as I mentioned earlier, but at the same time, it is definitely also the color of athletes and investigators. Just anyone trying to either perfect or inform. or find information. Now, the methods of knowledge that blue uses, most commonly they're going to simply just be education, like universities, libraries, other repositories for tangible or recorded learning. This can also be clues in reference to an investigation or references for research. Any sort of articles or studies that would assist in their particular profession or their own research. Even just data and recorded results from personal bests in the case of exercise or athletics, as I mentioned. Perhaps even, in a hypothetical sense, scrawlings on the wall of an ancient cave from which one might learn more about the culture and atmosphere that artist may have lived in without ever having been there themselves. And that's where sort of thinking through the abstract comes in, or hypothesizing and trying to take all of these details and almost disparate facts and piecing them together. Blue loves puzzles. And now that we've analyzed its key phrase, let's look at the different aspects of blue as an identity, as a color. One major facet of them, which I've been going over again and again, is blue's desire for knowledge and self-betterment. In general, blue believes that we are alive to learn about the world around us and to better ourselves and our lives through such learning. It doesn't want to sit stagnant in the world that it already knows. It wants to discover, to learn, to understand. It wants new, because anything that has been proven, it can't do anything else with that. That's been said, that's known. Like, what else is there to know about the known? That's why a lot of times you'll see blue aligned a lot with the ocean and the sea, because in reality, we as humans know hardly anything about our ocean. It is vast and deep, and there are so many places that have yet to be explored, and that's why it's so fascinating for blue, is because it's a whole different world down there. Anything could be there. Blue wants to learn for the sake of learning itself. It wants to know for the sake of knowing, to improve for the sake of improving. As I may have mentioned earlier, in difference to its allies white and black are both very determined colors. They both have an agenda, a hard, concrete, tangible goal they're trying to achieve. Blue is one of the colors that really has no agenda outside of the experience itself. As opposed to, for example, black using the knowledge to further its goals, blue will just have the knowledge to be like, we have this now, and we're better for it. And that's all that we need. Another big part of blue is striving for achievement and progress, with the big point of this: data. Everything is data. If it hasn't been recorded, then it can't be proven fact, which is part of why blue relies on the use of concrete figures to show their improvement. But in the end, these objective data points are often used for the sake of simulating or proving subjective or abstract theories. Really, their data points are starting off points, they're stepping stones to hypotheses, to ideas, to abstract concepts. Like I said, I'm going to be saying abstract a lot, but blue uses data and all of that as a tool. It uses that as a way to progress onward. It's almost like being given a writing prompt, and if you have no direction, if they just say write something, it's so hard to come up with anything. But if they tell you write something regarding this and this must happen at some point, they already have two things that you know, and you can just jazz in between there, man. Whoo. But like having a direction or something to base off of means you can pull away from that and use those points as things to base off of. Another big point in the achievement and progress era is that blue wants everyone to be better than they were yesterday. It wants humanity to learn and progress forward so that one day they might achieve things they never once could have dreamed of. And that's kind of one of the similarities it has with white, one of its allies, is that betterment is one of its goals. Its endgame is perfection. It wants people to be their best selves. It's not necessarily going to give up everything for that ideal, because then it would ruin its own progress, which is a big sticking point in white and blue. I'll get to that later. But it believes if you're not improving, then what are you doing? If you're not trying to get better and learn, why are you here? Get out of the way. A final point for a different aspect of blue is that it focuses on efficiency and making deliberate choices. Blue wants to get the most out of the time it spends developing skills or performing tasks, because in its mind, inefficiency is sloppy, and blue, as stated previously, is always chasing that perfection. Blue may often believe that it can't become better, smarter, stronger until it knows where its limit is. so it wants to hit that line so that it can then learn how to surpass it. Regarding deliberate choices, when blue makes a decision, it does so with plenty of premeditation. It will take as much time as it needs to make sure it knows the right answer for the given situation. It's going to learn everything it can before taking a single step. It wants to know what each decision will do so that I can choose the best decision and then branch off of that. Like chess. Blue kind of lives life as if it's chess. Oftentimes this may mean that blue will acknowledge when it doesn't have enough information, and it may pursue that course, gathering the unknown information, before further considering the problem at hand that requires the lost information in order to be solved. Now let's get into the fun part. Blue's relationships and opinions of the other 4 colors, starting with white. And like I said earlier, this might be a bit of a rehash, but I'm going to try my best to do this from blue's perspective so it's not just repeating the same ideas. Where white and blue agree. First point being forward progression of society. For example, the idea of a rising tide raising all ships. It's a lot to do with societal and cultural progression, moving forward to better everyone for the sake of bettering society and bettering quality of life. For white, that'll generally mean like civil rights, or it might mean laws for the sake of equality or for the sake of equity. For blue, that means if we can better everyone's quality of life, that will open up avenues and opportunities for more people to open up possibilities for us in the future. Basically, white and blue, in this sense, are trying to plant a seed in a garden they know they'll never see. White and blue also both agree on preparation before a decision, for example, using their head before their heart, which this similarity is a direct opposite to red, and is going to kind of explain why these 2 colors are both the opposite of red. They will think and prepare and organize and analyze before they take a single step. White wants to make sure that everything is in line and approved and the right thing to do before it's going to take that step. Blue wants to make sure everything is going to go in the right direction. White and blue also both heavily value a regular routine. If you have something that you live within, like a schedule or just an itinerary in general of things to do in a day or in a week, in a month, then you know what you have to work with. You know that abiding by that will offer proper progression for whatever skill, for whatever work you're trying to progress in. It knows that if you have those things reserved, those times, days reserved for whatever they're reserved for, the rest is free time to be able to do with as you please. Sorry for the interruption. This is Neil from the editor's bin, realizing that, you know what? I completely forgot when I was recording to do the differences between white and blue. So that's what this is now. I'm going to take a little bit of time and just put that in there. So here we go. Some of the main differences between white and blue, despite them being allies. The first one that I can think of is blue focusing more on the general why versus white focusing more on how, in the context of solving problems, per se. White likes to consider the source of a certain symptom, for example. They will often try and figure out the exact mechanisms of why this problem is a problem before actually solving it. Meanwhile, white just wants to know what the problem is, how to solve it, and then get on with their day. It's a lot of blue's idealism and imagination getting in the way of white's practicality, pragmatism, and just working to actually solve whatever problem is in the way. The next big difference between blue and white is blue believing and putting more faith into the idea of possibility versus white putting more stock into the idea of purpose. And by this, it's less of a worldly purpose like green, and it's more of an objective truth like a goal, a designation, a design. Blue, in this instance, is thinking more of a subjective reality, of something that can be malleable, and something that could be imagined and designed to be something different, something new, and it's basically creativity versus hard construction. Blue likes to imagine possibility, meanwhile white knows that there is a purpose and is trying to use something's purpose to a certain goal. The next big difference that I can think of, and this is some big words, so I apologize in advance, but blue focuses more on optimized investments, meanwhile white likes to think more in indiscriminate distribution. let me summarize that up. With blue, it wants to try and put as much effort and resources into something that it knows is going to be successful or knows is going to be very effective. This is it going to be very strategic into where it places things, letting things go where it knows there's not going to be much value in them. Meanwhile, white is just going to evenly distribute everything that it has, as I said, indiscriminately, of whatever necessities might be there. And this would be how sometimes blue might focus more on equity versus white focusing more on equality. This is kind of also white seeing some of black in blue, where it's going to try and get the maximum return that it can, whereas white is just giving everything evenly to every resource. Hopefully that summarizes up what I need to do, and back to the show. Moving on to how blue sees white. Blue sees white as a very helpful friend, kind of like a lab assistant with a bit of a bleeding heart. Blue knows that white is very useful, but thinks that their morals and ethics get in the way of the possibility of their achievements, thinks it's holding itself back. Blue thinks it knows how to work around white's predispositions, however, and so it's able to use white where it can be used, and then later leave white in a place where its other more impractical beliefs will not hinder blue's progress. Blue knows that there's no changing or convincing white toward leniency, so it does its best to work with what white can actually provide it. Sometimes this might lead to blue leaving white in the dark about certain things that white might find morally questionable, could lead to just blue taking advantage of white in its sort of moral crusade, or knowing exactly how white would respond to something and triggering that anyway, because that would be beneficial to its knowledge and progress. Continuing on with blue's relationship with black. Where these two both agree is in personal improvement and betterment. Regarding the self in this one, because black doesn't want to share what it learns, it doesn't want to share its knowledge because it sees everybody else as competition, as opposed to other points of reference or other collaborators that can help it learn by sharing. Blue and black both value possibility, potentiality, because blue sees those things as potential to move forward, to continue with whatever it's trying to learn or experience. And black sees those as valuable, possibility and potential. It sees those as things that it can utilize, that it can manipulate into learning more, becoming more powerful. I keep saying powerful as if that's relevant. Blue and black both have a very gray view on morality. Black because it's going to do what it wants to do, it's going to do what's going to help it, whether or not that's going to hurt somebody else. Blue because that's a very sort of subjectively emotional response, and blue sees a lot of impracticality in ethics and morals. Depending on its surroundings, of course, you'll often see a lot of the time blue and black aligned individuals both becoming those sort of mad scientist villain characters, which segues into the next point pretty well. Both believe in knowledge being power, the whole knowledge is power phrase. Blue knows that knowledge is how it's going to be better at the things that it's getting better at. Black knows that knowledge is another sort of currency that it can leverage either against other folks or for its own purposes, which will lead me into the differences between blue and black despite them being allies. Regarding knowledge, blue sees knowledge as the goal, whereas black sees knowledge as the means. To black, knowledge is a tool to be used like everything else. To blue, knowledge is its own fascination, is its own point of interest. Like I said earlier, knowledge for knowledge's sake, which is the big difference between the two. Blue believes in efficiency, whereas black believes in sacrifice. Blue wants to make sure it can keep all of its resources so that it can recur more resources, but black is much more willing to give something up in return for a huge return or an immediate return, whatever's going to be better for it, and especially sacrificing other folks, but that's a different thing for the black conversation in the next video. Blue believes in collaboration, whereas black will often side with greed. Blue recognizes that in collaborating with other folks and using other people's knowledge, that it can then boost not only its own but everyone involved. Coming together to blue is greater than the sum of its parts. Collaboration is another equation for blue that it has decided is quadratic, exponential. Whereas black doesn't want to share its knowledge with anyone else. Black, being as sort of greedy and consumerist as it is, black sees everything else as competition, as a threat. So if it believes if it shares that, then somebody can use that knowledge against them, because that's what they would do. And then the final point of difference is that blue believes more in imagination, whereas black settles itself more in realism. Blue wants to hypothesize, blue wants to extrapolate, blue wants to imagine and see that imagined world, that possibility, as something to strive for, as something fascinating to attain, whereas black sees that as impractical. It sees that as like, that's not real. We can't use what you're imagining because it's not real, it's not here. Once black sees a profitable value in whatever blue's imagination is, then it's going to come in and sort of ink its tentacles in that idea. So how blue sees black. Blue often sees black as the other adult in the room. It believes that black, having similar perspective on morality and sort of practicality oftentimes, as being the next most mature of all the colors. While blue is happy using white as a helper, it's more likely to see black as a collaborator. But that's not to say that blue is ignorant of black's own agenda. It knows where black stands. Blue knows it can't fully trust black with more impactful discoveries or sensitive information, because black is liable to abuse such things for its own purposes. Despite that, however, blue does see a certain intellectual rivalry, almost, with black that it really can't match with the rest of the colors in any way. Generally. And here we transition into blue's relationship with its enemy colors, starting with red. One of the biggest differences between blue and red is the use of deliberation versus impulse, or the head versus the heart. As I mentioned earlier, as a thing with that white and blue both share in common. Blue is going to consider each option. It's going to analyze each step before it reacts. Whereas red, it's just going to feel what it wants to do and follow that. Red is going to act directly on impulse. Blue would walk into a store and see the practicality of and the possibility of each item of clothing that it could take, and it's probably going to pick the one that's like, oh, I already have an outfit idea set up for this, or oh, I've been running low on these anyway. Whereas red's going to walk in and leave with the fluffy boa because it looked fun. So the next point, blue believes in efficiency, whereas red believes in expression. Oftentimes you'll see blue-aligned folks living in more minimalist spaces. For example, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Steve Jobs was quoted as saying, like, he uses the same outfit, like the black turtleneck and khakis. He uses that same outfit all the time because then he wasn't wasting brain space on an outfit for the day, so he can save that sort of processing power for everything else he needed to do. I don't know if that's true, but that idea is basically blue's take on efficiency over expression. Whereas red wants to show off exactly who it is and wear its heart on its sleeve, almost literally. And another point of difference, which is one that I'm very proud of because I came up with this one as well. Blue is always chasing perfection almost perpetually, whereas red very much believes in actually achieving catharsis. Red likes endings, and blue doesn't really care because it just is trying to continue. It's trying to achieve, and oftentimes once something is achieved, there's a next thing afterward. It's not gonna let something linger in the room and then exhale with that, whereas red kind of doesn't have the patience to continue on like blue does, often enough. Now we're moving on to where blue and red agree. First point being probably the most common take on blue-red as a collective pairing is they both believe in creativity and artistry and inspiration. They both believe in ideas and expressing those ideas and getting those ideas down and showing them off. You'll often see blue-red being attributed to artists in any medium, musicians, physical art, theater, because those are using knowledge and the scientific method, essentially doing something again and again and again and again and again to find out the perfect result, whereas the result is an emotional expression, an intuitive take on either life experience or just trying to elicit emotion. Another point is that red and blue both believe in living life without limitations. They don't want to be held back by anything, because if blue is held back in any way, that's another avenue that it can't learn in. It's another direction that it can't progress in. That boundary is set and they are frustrated because they don't know what could be on there. It could be good. They'd be happy with that knowledge. Whereas red just in general doesn't want to be chained up to anything. because freedom is a main tenet of red, and if they aren't free to do as they will, they might as not be around. If red is not free to do what it will, then it doesn't even want to exist at that point. And the final point of their agreement is, I'm gonna be honest, I'm pulling this directly from the actual cards. Blue and red are both pretty talented at persuasion, and I'm considering this conversational charisma. Coming from the blue angle on this one, it's oftentimes gonna be perhaps in a more debate style space, where it's taking facts and figures and debating the intellectual value of those things, whereas with red, it's going to be genuine charisma, force of personality, someone that you just want to be around because it's fun to be around them. And if you combine those things, that is deeply, deeply dangerous in the potential, because someone who knows a lot of things and is very convincing can make you do anything. Now let's move on to how blue views red. Blue sees red as an almost unattainable power source, in a way. Blue thinks that if red could be properly directed or controlled, focused, that it could achieve something truly magnificent. But red is too rebellious, too impulsive and reflexive to be of any use to blue in any sort of meaningful way, generally. Blue recognizes red's passion and desire for action, and so considers it to be simply unpolished, like a raw gem that is yet to be cut. But as much as blue may want to change red, doing so would remove everything that makes red so fascinating to blue, because blue is precision, whereas red is volatility. And changing that volatility, reducing it at all, dulls the shine. Now we're moving on to the final color relationship, is blue with green. Now where blue and green differ, since they are enemies, blue believes in innovation and green is a fan of complacency. I don't mean that in a negative sense. Blue wants to improve upon things. Even stuff that's working, blue believes that it can work better and is trying to work towards that, whereas green is perfectly happy with the things that it has because those things work just fine. It sure can replace things that break down and whatnot, but green doesn't see the need to add on to anything. If it needs to adapt, it'll adapt. Blue believes in education, whereas green is more of a fan of experience. Blue is chasing sort of more higher learning, whereas green believes it knows that the best way to learn about life is to live. Green wants to take life experiences and turn that into beneficial wisdom, whereas blue kind of wants to skip past that and just know what it needs to know so that it can use that. It's kind of the difference between someone college educated in a field versus someone who's been working in that field for their entire life anyway. They're gonna have different perspectives, even though they're in the same place. Now this final point might kind of be similar to the first point, but it's blue believes in artifice, sort of like tools and manufacturing, versus green believing more in adaptation, in sort of physically acclimating to whatever circumstances or atmosphere that it's in. In a broad sense, this is sort of technology versus mutation, you know? Sort of technology versus biology, I guess. If blue sees that it's deficient in some factor, in some case, in some situation, it's going to create a tool or design an equation that'll help it succeed in that situation. Whereas green is kind of just going to butt its head against the solution until it's solved. It's kind of just going to let itself work in that area until it's acclimated to working in that area. Continuing on to where green and blue both agree, which honestly to me is green and blue conjunctively is kind of one of the most fascinating relationships in the whole color wheel philosophy. Blue and green both agree on the importance of the wonders of the natural world, or even just how spectacular the natural world is, just science, and biological science, and the power of nature itself. Whereas blue likes to see that and learn from it and notice all of these patterns within nature. Green is just struck by the majesty of it all and how all of this created itself and the reverence for nature. Sort of piggybacking off of that, blue and green both appreciate and observe patterns and natural perfection, and especially to an extent mathematics, because you find math in like everywhere in nature. You see snails have the enlarging spiral on their shell. You'll see plants are fractals because a trunk will have branches, will have twigs, will have leaves that have veins. It's all fractal and it's all expounding upon itself. Even like our moon rotates around the Earth, rotates around the sun, rotates around the center of the galaxy. Like, it's all concentric. That'll happen by itself. And green holds these natural powers in such high regard, and blue acknowledges all of the power in these natural things, and it sees the patterns and how blue sees how it works. Green knows that it does work and has faith in the fact that it works. Another smaller, more relative thing that blue and green both agree on is the purpose of storytelling and using fables as lessons. In this instance, it isn't just blue and green, it's blue-green. Because it's blue using its knowledge and its creativity in conjunction with green's experience and wisdom on how the world works and how to be a better person for yourself and your community. Blue and green want to use these stories to teach people, to inform, to help people, to help either reinforce their cultural identity or to teach and inform on things that are beneficial to, as I said, their people in their community. Now let's move on to how blue views green. Blue sees green with equal parts fascination and frustration. Blue sees green going about its life with little to no ambitions and perfectly content in its current situation, which goes directly against what blue believes in. Acknowledging that, blue can't ignore its own intrigue at how such an illogical and inefficient lifestyle can be so rewarding to an individual. Green's able to grow and adapt on its own with little to no intention behind said growth. It seems directionless, yet it carries on anyway. I think what really makes green blue's enemy is the fact that blue can't solve the paradox that is green. And now we're going to get down to the more personal philosophy of blue, starting with its strengths and its weaknesses. Some of blue's strengths involve problem solving, especially abstract. Blue really likes puzzles and like stuff like Sudoku, you know? Blue is really good at learning new skills and, for example, languages, because it essentially knows how those things work as a concept, and it's more just learning the facts on top of those and how those systems work on top of that. Blue's really good at researching and retaining new information. You want someone blue aligned on your team for trivia night, that's all I'm saying. Blue is also really good at analyzing topics and observing pieces of a whole. They're people watchers. They're also really good at assessing and addressing setbacks or weaknesses. They'll evaluate a subject or a situation or a product and see where it's going to fail or where it's going to succeed. Some weaknesses of blue. Some blue folks can often be dismissal of emotions and sentimentality. They can be kind of cold and cut off. Blue can often have this sort of arrogant reliance on known facts and methods, especially when faced with conflicting results. There are some situations where a blue individual will be like, but I know it works this way, why am I getting this result? It doesn't make sense, it's an outlier, it doesn't matter. Blue might obsess over research or practice to the point of neglecting the needs of themselves or others, cramming study in the middle of the night when you need to sleep, or missing meals because you're too busy working on something new. That can oftentimes be blue valuing the product and the knowledge over their own actual body and physical needs. Blue can often fall into the pit of toxic perfectionism where they're trying to achieve 100% totality when there are situations where that's not possible, and so they'll drive themselves insane trying to reach it. Consider also exhaustive attempts to achieve that peak efficiency. They could overcomplicate issues, especially when trying to appear clever. They just like overthink to a point where their point is so abstract that there's literally just an easy solution that would get past all of the eccentricities. Another weakness of blue is a potentiality to over-idolize a perceived cleverness. I kind of consider this idolizing those like fictional characters that are assholes, but they're smartasses about it, so that it's endearing. So now let's talk about blue at its best. Blue at its best is going to be moving forward and pushing for progress. The blue individual at their best is taking things it's learned and it's using those lessons to solve the problems in front of it. Then it's using those lessons to solve the next problems, and so on and so on. For some, blue's devotion to grow and to keep moving may seem like an impossible task, but blue is fueled by the desire to make it to that next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. Blue at its best is achieving and realizing its dreams. Blue recognizes the value of imagination and aspiration, so at its best, blue will be trying to use its own success to propel others forward and to make success accessible to anyone daring enough to hold tight onto their dreams. Blue at its best understands that when one person betters himself, it betters everyone around them, and so on, and that'll spread until everyone is becoming their best self. A blue individual at their best will be innovating and making new. Instead of simply dismissing the old or common methods, the best among Blue will be working to improve those things, or to treat the illness instead of the symptoms, as it were. And now we move on to Blue at its worst. A Blue individual at worst can often be conflating success with being morally good or superior. It's possible for blue-aligned folks to equate intelligence or achievement with being good or being right or being morally superior to those around them who aren't as intelligent or successful. This is kind of similar to that idolization of cleverness. A lot of times blue individuals falling to this fault will be those who are promoting contrarianism to an excess, or playing devil's advocate in situations that really doesn't call for it, because they're trying to just show off, oh, look how smart I am. Another example of Blue being at its worst is consciously ignoring moral standards or limits for the sake of achievement or progress. Perhaps either performed in a point of desperation, one may be willing to cross certain ideological boundaries in order to set new records or breach new ground. It's going to be a little cruel, but for example, animal testing. Essentially experimenting on a subject that's incapable of consenting to said experimentation. Another thing that a blue individual at their worst will do is exercise mental manipulation. Blue is the color that is most likely to play mind games with someone in order to get their way or to progress in whatever way they're trying to progress. Oftentimes, this may come through as gaslighting or as hypothetical arguments. Really anything they can do to convince someone that they are the smartest one and that they know best. This could be obfuscating facts, or it could be misleading in a cyclical argument intentionally in order to get their way. Now that we got the heavy stuff behind us, let's take a look at some examples of blue-aligned characters in fiction. And now I'm going to try and consider these characters mono-blue for these arguments. I'm going to start this off with a pretty obvious one, Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock Holmes is an investigator. He's an inquisitive mind by nature. Like, that's who he is. A lot of times in the novels, there's something going on that a lot of people conceive to be supernatural or magical almost, whereas Sherlock Holmes has enough knowledge about just the world in general and of people that he can figure out, or knows how to figure out, what's actually happening. I'm going to use, especially as an example, the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes character in the movies especially. A great example of this is the fight scene where he's in that boxing arena, and you see him thinking out the entire fight before he even starts it, and then just calculated annihilation. This guy is calculated, he is intelligent, and he knows it. This can often lead him to being very arrogant and having that smartest person in the room sort of attitude about him, which does often lead to some disagreements between himself and Watson. Another mono blue character is, pretty fittingly, Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender, especially in book 1. Her entire storyline and plot arc in that season is about learning how to waterbend and perfect that, because she's the only one in her village at the time who can actually waterbend, and so she wants to learn about that and become better at that. And so her going around looking for these scrolls to teach her how to do these techniques and everything with the waterbending, and then once they're actually in, God, I forget if it's the northern or southern, but once they're in the other water tribe, because I don't remember which one it is exactly, once they're in the other water tribe, she is appalled that she's rejected from the lessons because she's a girl, because she's like, I just want to learn, like, teach me, I can do this, I want to learn to do it better. But yeah, her entire goal is learning how to become better at this skill that she has. And at the same time, it's water themed, so you know, blue. And it wouldn't feel right without involving a villain from pop culture to put into one of these, so I'm going to choose to use Hannibal Lecter. So in The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter is Hannibal Lecter is a psychologist, but he's also a very conniving and evil cannibal serial killer. In the film, at least, because I haven't read the book, but in the film at least, Clarice is trying to use this man's knowledge of serial killers and how they work to catch another serial killer. This man knows how people's brains work, he knows how to manipulate someone, and in just a conversation, he's able to pierce into Clarice's psyche and get her to break. But at the same time, he's also correct about Buffalo Bill and all the things that he's going to do, and leads her to the correct spot. And he also manages to break out of his confinement by the end of the film. This guy's smart. As a final inclusion for these blue line characters from pop culture and fiction, I'm going to use Shuri from the Black Panther film. And I'm especially using her because she's a direct example of the contention between blue and green. In the scene with the ritual combat and sort of the more closer to the beginning of the film, she's balking at the tradition. She is saying like, why are we here? We don't need to do this. Let's just get it over with so we can actually do some real things that matter. And then M'Baku comes in and actually calls her out for that. Like, she detests our traditions so much. Do you really want this child leading us and all that? But in reality, she is the smartest person in that nation. She is the leader of their scientific developments. Like, even her phrase when she first shows up in a scene is, just because it works doesn't mean it can't work better. Yeah, she's a very, very blue to her core character. Okay, and that about does it for this one. So thank you so much for watching, or sticking to the end of it like some of you did. I hope. Please feel free to share more of your opinions on blue, either things that I missed or things that you disagree with. Write stuff in the comments, please. I read them. Tell me other mono blue characters you think that I might have missed out on. I know I wanted so badly to put the Riddler in, but I felt like Hannibal Lecter was such a better example, but I'm just so biased on my Ridley boy. But yeah, I'll have a link to a TV tropes page that actually is pretty surprisingly comprehensive on the color pie philosophy. I'll have a link to that in the description. I'll have a link to another article that I found that I've been linking in the previous ones for the monocolors that is also a good read as an analysis on these. Looking forward to the next video. It's going to be on black, which is going to be really fun because I feel like black is one of the colors that has the most misconceptions about it. To be fair, they all have some misconceptions and stereotypes about them, but I feel like black is the one that's done the most dirty. That's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks again. Hope you stick around for the next one. I hope it doesn't take this long to frickin' make the next one. But yeah, so anyways, in conclusion, be kind, be creative, play games. Okay, I'll see you later. Oh god, excuse me.